With the US presidential election looming around the corner, I want to talk about a couple of key components that I think are unique to this time period and I think unique to our personal development. I mean, if you're listening to this, you've been following my story, or you're interested in human development or your own development and healing and all of that stuff, to the point of listening to me as your guide in a lot of ways. And so I'm taking that role very, I don't want to say seriously, but personally, and really leaning in. So I think given this time period, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of fear. I mean, concern is really just like tiny fear, microdosings of fear. And so fear of the unknown is very natural. It's very much a part of the human experience. Uh, but it's also something where we know that we're afraid of the unknown. So there's always a known there. So it can be a little silly to maintain that fear. Um, and, you know, there are big picture cycles of change that are typically happening. And as human beings, we are a part of that cycle of change. We are a microcosm of that massive aspect of change. Now, change doesn't necessarily mean progressive change in terms of the political sense. Like, progress is not defined by any political party. Progress is not defined by any human being. Progress is like really a nature thing. At some point, you know, an asteroid could hit us all and everything resets from our perspective. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, it may just be another tick forward. Right? It's forward is forward in terms of how we perceive time, but time in and of itself is just a construct that we use to connect these dots of existing and to track our changes. So without getting too esoteric, you know, I ultimately want to talk about something that I'm writing about right now. I'm writing a book called The Quantum Age: The Future of Humanity Right Now. And the quantum age is really this idea of the next 80 to 100 years, the next saculum in generational theory. And it's this idea that every 80 to 100 years, we have this new era of existence, at least within human history, but the rest of the world seems to be syncing up as well. That over every 20 to 25 years, we have these turnings, and they are the equivalent of seasons, where you've got the spring or the high, you've got the awakening or the summer, you've got the unraveling or the fall, and then you've got the crisis or the winter. It's the same sort of temperature and tone, and different generations are born during these different turnings. And these different generations represent different archetypes. You've got the prophet, the nomad, the hero, and the artist. And in ancient stories, these archetypes appear all the time and basically in every story, and they appear in the same order. Even if it starts from the artist or if it starts from the nomad, it still goes in the same order. And they just serve different roles and do different things. You might hear a lot of anti hero stories being about the nomad traveler who is, you know, facing the world on their own as a survivalist. The prophet may be foreseeing visions of an apocalyptic future and wants to start putting the pieces in place to, you know, to make bigger things happen eventually, even if they are not the one that can make anything majorly change. The hero has a lot of ambitions. They are trained from a young age to be the hero, often programmed to be the hero, and maybe have to undo some of that programming, often deal with the feelings of being a reluctant hero and stepping into their responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, kind of thing, and a little bit of a tainted relationship with power at times, sometimes afraid of their own power and their own ability to make the change, you know, and you're kind of born into this role that maybe you don't want. And then the artist is usually cataloging, you know, all of the whole story and sharing what has happened. So a lot of stories end up coming from the perspective of the artist, or is being told to the artist, or is being witnessed by the artist in some sense. You know, so that those are basically the four archetypes that are playing out. And then on a big picture scale, each of these eras are an unfolding or a turning or a spiraling in a progressive direction. You can think of it as the same way of, if you've got the Earth and you've got the seasons, if you zoom out, then you've got the Earth orbiting the sun. And these orbits are sort of the big picture eras. And then if you zoom out even further, you see that the solar system is moving, or the solar system is moving through the galaxy. So nothing's ever static. Nothing's ever going back or going backward. Essentially, everything is perpetually right now. The illusion there too is that everything's going forward, right? Well, there's really no forward. Everything is now. It's just a continual unfolding of now. So that's why in the title it's the quantum age, the future of humans right now. It's a little bit of a messing with your head kind of thing. And that's the idea that everything is perpetually right now. So when we talk about going back to an age or not going back to an age, it's like we're never going back. We're maybe going to do a new derivative of that old thing, but we're never doing the old thing again. It's done. It's what happened. It's history. It's recorded or forgotten. And so when we go quote unquote forward, it is typically in the direction that we prefer things to go. So we may or may not realize that we prefer it to go in a negative direction if we need to fulfill a destiny that we feel like we need to fulfill. So if we feel like the world needs to go to shit for us to feel a sense of purpose, then we're going to go that direction, right? So there's a perpetual unconscious unfolding, and at some point we may decide to go a different way if we feel like we can become conscious of these roles that we're playing. But I'm not saying that's the goal. I don't know that that's the goal. It may be that these unfoldings are just part of nature, and we are a part of the nature unfolding and how we develop technology and societies and all of that stuff. So these big picture eras, the Earth moving through the universe, is effectively, well, I should say it's the orbiting, is effectively uh, Graves levels or moving through levels of development. One of the ways that I like to simplify the understanding of levels of development is the desires for each development. So I like to talk about how we have this initial desire to be welcomed. It's part of survival. If you are stuck in the cold, being welcomed is important. It's a dependency. When you're born into this world, you are dependent. And so being welcomed or not is pivotal to whether or not you actually survive. And if you do not feel welcomed, even if you are physically there, that can have an effect on your nervous system throughout the rest of your life. So some people can feel like a sense of belonging is always missing, and that may be some work that they need to do. The next stage is the desire to be loved. And loved is basically being shown that you're not a burden on the people that are caring for you, because there's almost like a knowing that you're dependent, not completely conscious of it, but there's a need for reinforcement that me being a dependent is not a problem, that I'm not a burden on my parents or whoever's taking care of me. So the telling of stories, hugs, emotional reinforcement is usually this expression of love that no, I'm here and I'm caring for you because I love you and I want to care for you, not because I have to or because you're a burden and I'm stuck with you. And when people feel like they were a burden as a child, they can have a mixed relationship with boundaries. They can have a difficult time feeling a sense of self-worth, and may need to go back and do some of that work to find maybe a surrogate family or someone that's actually going to show them that love and show them that they are not a burden, to show them how to self-parent and show yourself that you're not a burden, and perhaps release burdens if you had to parentify your parent, and stuff like that. This is where complex trauma comes in. Feelings of shame can come up, and needing to love yourself or be loved by people around you is an important part of this work here. Next level is the desire to be protected. And the desire to be protected is about outside of the family. It's finding your people, your subculture, your group, that you know that if someone calls you weird for something that's relatable amongst the group, that your people have got your back, right? And often it's being sort of welcomed in or ordained in some sort of way, or college students will like go through hazings or razzings and some sort of initiation to welcome you into the group. Little gangs, crews, cohorts, uh, groups of teenagers that are wandering. There's usually a hierarchy amongst them, there's a patriarch there, um, or patriarch's probably not the right word, but you get this hierarchical system that is basically of status. Status starts to pop up. So it's people of different families, and maybe you start searching for a mate. Sexuality becomes more of a thing, and it's about power, aggressiveness, assertiveness. So, in that sense, entering that world, you need to know that you're protected and cared for. So, if you go to the mall, you know that if you come across a quote unquote enemy, that your crew has got your back, whether that's directly or in some sort of revenge. um, and so if you're a nerd and you go into the mall and someone calls you a nerd, your fellow nerds are going to back you up, and they're all going to pull out their pocket protectors and beat them. That sort of energy. Um, may not necessarily need to be that violent or aggressive, but usually it is some sort of physical thing. And so being protected is is the feeling that we're going for at this stage, to feel a sense of belonging. And if you don't feel protected, it really is about your relationship to culture and society. So there can be two main things that come up. You can go too hard with it and develop a really intense prejudice, and that could carry throughout your life, and you don't realize you carry that prejudice with you. That could be racial, gender, ethnicity, nationality, or even just like rap sucks, rock rules kind of thing. Like you just keep that, and it's like kind of silly to hold on to that later in life. But there is some credence to keeping some of those preferences. Like I was a goth kid during that time, sort of this weird atheist kid, and if I ignore that part of me, he could feel socially ostracized. He could feel like he doesn't belong, and that feeling of not being protected feels like being a lone warrior, being surrounded, and you can feel this sense of not having a tribe. And in a way, that the sort of modern tribalism, I think, is really what a lot of people are experiencing right now. That kind of energy, that feeling of like, oh, if I'm going to talk shit on the internet to somebody, I either know or feel or want to be protected by my people. Like if I say a comment that's representative of my subculture, that I know that people are going to back me up. And I think there's a lot of this energy that's really rampant, and it's starting to manifest in the physical world a little bit more. People who are more protective and signaling that they belong to this crew. It's the Crips and the Bloods. It's this color, these colors, these flags that represent my team, my people. And the healthy version of that is like sports teams and stuff, but the unhealthy version of that is, you know, flags that are not national flags. Let's say that. Um, and these sort of perpetuated beliefs of subculture based on shallow senses of belonging. So you feel this almost like false sense of security, this false sense of being protected, and then that grows at scale, and then you feel like this is your country now. This is where you belong. So you could see where that narrative kind of fits in. So part of it is like eventually letting go of that. And then the other part is like if you don't feel a sense of belonging and you perpetually feel like you don't socially fit in anywhere, you may not have an attunement to what your subculture actually is. And it could be good for you to take the time to actually know what that is. Whether that's like, you know, it's really following your passion, whatever your passion actually is. So you can default and end up being a part of a very vague subculture, or you can find something specific and say like, well, I'm a poker player, I'm a dungeon master, I play D&D games. Those are my people. You know, I'm this kind of nerd, I'm that kind of geek, and you see that sort of everywhere. And so people who have a relationship to a sports team or subculture usually have a relationship to this. And if you don't have that, it can end up becoming political, and that ends up becoming more of a survivalist ownership kind of thing. And this is not exclusive to any political party. You've got the extremes. And when people over identify with the extremes, then they want the world to look like that. The next one is the desire to be remembered, which is about assimilating into society at large. So it's beyond your subculture, but it's your collective culture. and it's starting to feel this sense of belonging in a bigger way, and starting to reconcile with something like death, where it's a desire to be remembered beyond your life and the sacrifices you made in your life. So, whereas being a part of a subculture is about you, and it's about your sense of belonging, and it's about where you fit in, now you've found a way into society, and now it's like thinking beyond yourself. It's like, what's my family going to look like? What is what are generations of my family going to think of me as? And how are they going to look at me and remember me? I think of Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, where it's about putting up an altar of your family members, and as long as those family members are on there and someone remembers them, then their spirit remains and stays alive. It's about legacy in that kind of way. At its extremes, yeah, it could be about big picture legacy and trying to have your name be on all of the buildings and all the statues, and be remembered forever, because maybe you have a sense that you're not a good person. So this belief that you should be remembered as a good person may force a lot of insecurity to create big picture change. Some people just have natural legacy and natural ambition. So I'm not necessarily saying that if someone desires to have their name on a building that it's a bad thing. Uh, but it's because if you build a school, you build a school. That's great, you know, or contribute in some sort of way. So that contributes to society. And usually the reward for doing something like that, for sacrificing, for contributing, for giving, for being the best moralistic person, is to be remembered in some sort of way, given a medal of honor or your name on a building or a plaque or something like that. So it's it's like that's the prize ultimately, is being remembered in some sort of way. And you develop skills here. You maybe find a job, or you focus in on some sort of way of how you're going to contribute to society, and that contribution usually starts to build towards economy and family and all of that stuff. So some of it's religious, some of it is being a good religious person, sometimes it's just you know actual sacrifice, not the subculture dominance, but an actual sacrifice into society. I think of like firefighters and police officers who are given medals for their long-term service or for saving a life. I have two grandfathers that were both in the Korean War that received Purple Hearts, and that's often why I put a Purple Heart when I'm texting people. That's just sort of a little note to my family's legacy, and I like looking at that sort of thing. I like honoring that, and that's part of my personal legacy that I like to honor. And if you don't necessarily have a relationship to legacy, or if you haven't built a foundation, or sometimes it is through your children and raising them to be similar to you or have similar values, and you feel a sense of settledness that, okay, my legacy is going to carry forward and I can move on. If you don't have that, that might be something that's missing in your life, and could be something that's worth looking into. Or building a big project. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be children, but it could be some sort of legacy, something to be remembered by. uh, is pretty important for our sense of wholeness, especially a connectedness to society, to your city, and where you belong. And so there might be this constant striving, if you're kind of addicted to this stage of having your name on everything. But having your name on something, I think, is pretty important. For me, it was when I worked in the film industry. I have two film credits: one on Man of Steel as a data render technician, and Top Gun 3D. So same thing, data render technician towards the end, right front and center, which is pretty cool. And that's something I can always turn to and share with my kids, and feel this sense of like, I did that. I think dopamine is some version of a legacy for me, even though my name's not really on it, it's all over it. um, but it doesn't have a relationship to the city or anything like that. When I was in Philadelphia, I worked at Phillies games and I was a part of the social media aspect. I was known around the city as my dad's kid, but it's about making a legacy for yourself. So you want to put your name out there and be known. Um, so thinking about that is something that it's a little malleable and uncertain in my own personal legacy. And when we're thinking about politics, you know, often that's what drives a lot of politicians is like, I want to put a bill forward so that I'm remembered. I want to put some sort of policy in place because I want to be remembered. Even if that's an incentive that maybe sounds like arrogant, it's just very much a natural part of the human progression. I'm going to move forward a little more quickly so that I can get through these. Is the desire to be rewarded is next, which is not necessarily waiting for your legacy to take hold and having to spend your whole life building a legacy and being rewarded after you're dead. It's now like, I actually want to work to be rewarded now. So it becomes about the self again, but it's still using those skills to work towards being rewarded for yourself. It's like, I want to build a company, or I build a network, or build an idea that ends up getting me the accolades, or to be discovered as a talent, or to get economic rewards or lifestyle rewards in some sort of way. And it's about ambition. It's about the life that I want. It's like, what is the limit of what I can personally achieve? What does success look like for me? What is possible? Where can I go? And there's often this feeling of limitlessness, that I can go until the ends of the earth. And this is where equal opportunity lies. America was a major principle of American society is this idea of equal opportunity. And that's true. Even though we're fighting against equity and trying equal rights and all of that stuff, equal opportunity, at least as the idea that anyone can go forward with as little limitation as possible, is true. If you work hard enough, you can make it happen. What is missing comes at the next stage, which is all about realizing that we're not all at different starting points, and we don't all meet the same free terrain. We have different obstacles because of our different starting points. So that's work that society is trying to reconcile right now. But when it comes to our personal um, self and ambitions, we're just trying to tune to what those are. So some people can go forward and they have a completely clear path in front of them, and they have great charisma and they have a great personality and people like them, and they are of the favorable race, or they have like they're beautiful and they have the right height or whatever, and people trust them, and all of the things sort of fall into place for them. And while that sounds nice, they can actually reach the bounds of realizing that they are feeling limitless and they don't have a limit. They don't have a natural boundary placed on them. And at some point, a boundary needs to be found. Otherwise, they will continue to just consume, 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 consume. And so that can be the worst on the other side. The challenge on the sort of lower side would be that you just realize you have a lot of limits, whether that's because of your upbringing, or uh, racially, or mental health wise, personality wise. You may have a set of challenges that are continually getting in your way, that are skewing your relationship to yourself, and you're skewing your relationship to success. So you may hit burnout over and over again because you're trying to make an impact, you're trying to make things happen, and nothing happens, right? By impact, I mean just simple cause and effect. Um, and nothing is going forward. You're not able to make the things happen that you want to make happen. And so something needs to change. You need to either reframe your relationship to success, or find another path, maybe change a career, try a different type of entrepreneurship, or try a different type of academics, or uh, uh, go forth towards a different kind of exploration or discovery. And, this constant shifting and trying to find your lane is pretty important, but it can be a challenge. And you could basically just have success in terms of the lifestyle you want, of freeing up time And it may not be that you have a lot of money. It may not be that you have, uh, the sort of vision of a mansion by the beach kind of thing. But it may be that you realize, oh, I've been a success in the family I've built. I have a home. I have gratitude for the things that I have around me. And so instead of having an endless ceiling, you realize, oh, okay, this is my ceiling and I'm very happy with this house. I'm happy with this life. And that settling can allow you to start to move into the next stage. So it's either that or you accomplish everything you want in terms of material possessions and you just end up in this empty mansion. That was like Mark Cuban's story. He would say that I had everything I ever wanted and I ended up in a mansion by myself and there was no furniture and I was like, what is this? What else is there? And that moves you into the next stage, which is the desire to be accepted. Because then by this point in your life, maybe you've made a lot of mistakes. Maybe you have realized you have wounds. Maybe you realize that there is a lot of ways that you prefer the world to be. And so it's this path of accepting and being accepted, starting to understand yourself through people. It's less about material success. It's less about being remembered. It's less about fitting in with friends, though that starts to come back in a little bit. It's about being accepted. So it's getting to know different cultures and starting to talk to people and get to know their stories and how your stories relate to each other. That basically people have had lives up to this point that you're almost working in parallel. And now you're stopping and looking at each other and sharing these stories and collectively trying to deconstruct culture a little bit as well. This is the idea of postmodernism. And if you've heard that term, postmodernism is effectively this: it's deconstructing culture and it's trying to understand um, the reality that we would like to create. So there's a lot of idealism that comes in here to start to deconstruct and then reconstruct. And really, this stage is all about the deconstruction part. It's really about seeing that other people are projecting and that they have biases and that we're not all starting from the same place and life's kind of unfair. But life's fair in its unfairness. um, but we're sort of unraveling how maybe the culture is biased um, or how people just don't get the same opportunities that you think. And maybe this could awaken an awareness of people not having that fairness, and that could awaken guilt within yourself or shame or blame, and having to reconcile some of those feelings, right? So it's getting to know people of different cultures, different faiths, different backgrounds, different nations, uh, different religions, different histories, and starting to see how you relate to them and getting to know yourself through that external reflection. So in a way, it's this process of eventually accepting others and accepting yourself. But I think it's really first about accepting others and accepting that they have a story, whether they are the hero, villain, or victim in a certain context or situation. It makes sense that they feel this way. And now, often, postmodernism is defining and discovering victims and discovering how I'm a victim or have been a victim, right? And often landing on how you've been a victim, right? So I've been a victim of my religion, for example, or I've been a villain of men, or a victim of men, or whatever it is that may be. So you're doing a lot of relating and connecting and eventually finding how you've been a victim through finding out how other people have been a victim. So either it's supporting them and championing them, and maybe you realize that you want to be a rescuer to them. And then there's also the persecutor role. So there may be people that you deem as bad, and you say that they're bad for society and we need to take them out or we need to stop them. They are creating obstacles, you know, that it becomes this drama triangle. And the drama triangle is this codependency spiral, so to speak, and something we all very much get trapped into. Now, I've heard someone say that we're all the victim of a drama triangle. That's a little paradoxical. We are effectively creating our reality, so we are learning to develop out of this drama triangle, but we get wrapped up in it and we get caught in the swirl of it. So I wouldn't say victim in the sense that we are helpless to get out of it, but that we are effectively spending our lives looking at the world this way. And when we don't have success, particularly, we can develop a lot of victim shaming about ourselves and about our circumstance. Or if we've had a lot of success and we feel like we are capable and it's our job to lift these people up, then we become the rescuers. Or if we see the people that are ruining society, we need to tear them down or we need to tear the system down. That's the villain role, right? So it's sort of moving around these different roles, but you can also very much live in one for a little while or see the world or see a lot of different circumstances through that lens. And so often the work is releasing the hold on that drama triangle. It's starting to say, like, I can't save the world, or I can't destroy all the people that I assume are ruining everything. Or I have to develop some sort of compassion for them because they have their own motivations and they're not always the villain. And it really is through this relating. Like, it's fun at first to start relating with people who are like obviously kind and obviously loving or obviously similar to me. But then you get to the territory where you have to start relating with people who are very different than you know, or someone to whom you've had wounds related to. It's relating with a parent or relating with someone that represents your parent or someone who represents a religion that really harmed you when you were young, or someone who you assume is like an evil CEO billionaire guy, and through some means you get to know them, whether that's through a documentary or in person, and you start to see, oh, there's complexity to this person. They're not the villain that my imagination painted them to be, and so I need to relinquish that. I need to let that go, and it's ultimately this letting go process of my relationship to culture, because being a rescuer, being a persecutor, being a victim is also part of your own deconstruction relationship to culture, right? If you're defaulting to being a rescuer, there's some personal and collective programming in there that you've taken on, right? It's what's called an introjection, which is which is that I don't realize what I've taken in or how it's affecting me. That's one type of shadow. And the work of an introjection is to release that, is to say, that's actually not my burden to bear. Not that it's not my problem or that I can never not care about it, but it's not something that needs to live in me every second of every day. If the context arises and I could do something about it, then great. But if I'm in bed at night and I can't sleep because I'm panicking about, it's the parking lot, uh, and they're panicking about uh, the world's problems and how can I fix it, and I can't do anything and I feel helpless, and you're just panicking over and over and over again. Like, there's no practical purpose for any of that. At some point you have to let that go. Any feeling that's pervading our psychology is an introjection, and usually something that needs to be let go. And letting go is really hard to like communicate how to do, because you just have to stop. Like, you just have to stop. You have to stop panicking, you have to stop swirling. You maybe have to distract your brain, maybe you have to do something else, maybe listen to music, or maybe write it out, or some other release technique, writing in a journal, and or venting. Venting is like letting steam out, right? It's so you have to let it go, and letting it go in a situation in which you're not going to continue to feed it either. So if you're continuing to feed it on social media or through watching the news or talking to people around you that are constantly feeding this role, then you're needing to perhaps move on from them if you want to have this sense of peace that, this is not your problem every second of every day. And so that eventually moves you into this territory of being needed. It's the desire to be needed is where I think the world is moving. So I'm going to use this as the transition point to talk about what I was originally talking about, which is sort of like the politics of it all and where we are and where we're moving into. Because right now, what the last 80 years represents is this accepting time period, is this um, postmodern saculum, this postmodern 80-year period. And we've been deconstructing culture over the last 80 years. And one thing that's unique about this perspective is it's fourth person perspective. So it's about looking at culture. It's about deconstructing and looking at how other cultures may view us, and maybe having a negative view on your own culture. And so it started with the 60s and starting with the flower power human potential movement, and starting to see what humans are capable outside of culture and what we can do to expand our capabilities and to live outside of culture. That's why it's like, Woodstock was in a field somewhere, right? It's like, how can we get outside of society and start to build communes or build ways of living that are not dependent on, you know, in this case, it was the nuclear family or the traditional ways of living and going through life. How can we build something that is maybe not so focused on economics and striving in the industrial age, right? How can we start to think about ways of living? Now, with baby boomers, it was like, it was fun, it was play, it was like really trying to explore that through the me centric lens. But that was their point of exploration. For Gen Xers, if you listen back to a lot of 90s music, there are a lot of tribal beats that I did not realize are in the music. you know, um, and it's really like more aggressive tribal beats that are in a lot of music. I wish I could think of an example that. Well, I actually was listening to the band Korn recently because I grew up listening to them, and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of preference for more of a tribal, like doom do do doom do 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 do, like that kind of, not, that's not an actual thing I'm representing, but it's that vibe. And particularly when you get towards like new metal in the 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s, you hear a lot more of that. And then it starts to like kind of ridge it out a little bit, and it becomes less about tribal music. But a lot of the 90s have some of that, and a little bit more of reggae in there at times. I would just beg you to go back into some 90s music and listen for that. The band Incubus and Red Hot Chili Peppers are probably good examples. Like that LA early 90s sound, late 80s sound was a lot of like that sort of tribal beats, these dudes running around with no shirts on, naked. Like there's like, that was the vibe, just being more like tribalistic. But because they're the nomad generation, they were much more tribalistic in the sort of uh, uh, holding spears and being aggressive kind of sense. And what are we doing as like warrior chants and ways to show strength, right? So I don't know. All of that's really interesting to take a look at. And then millennials. I'm gonna take a drink of water real quick. And then millennials, as we've grown up into through our young adulthood, we started to really develop this sense of systemic deconstruction. So it's not just culturally living outside of the bounds, though I know plenty of people in postmodernism these days that are trying to build their own commune or trying to live outside of the bounds of society, kind of close by, still, not in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, but like, finding this little patch of land that is owned by a farm or is whatever, and then just commandeering it or buying it and trying to live in their own little isolated society and trying to make it work in sort of this shared commune, barter system economy. The challenge with barter systems is that it's very dependent on relational stuff, which is not always not always positive. Um,
And it's an attempt to abandon previous levels to try to honor this one. And you need all of it. It's all like nested dolls. So you need to feel welcomed. You need to feel loved. You need to feel protected. You need to feel that you'll be remembered by the people you're interacting with, that you're going to be rewarded at times for the work that you're doing, that you're going to be accepted by the people around you. And right now, in terms of what we're working on and deconstructing, I think we're entering the difficult stuff. At the early 2000s, maybe early 2010s, the internet was exciting. We were getting to know different people. We were starting to see that people around the world can interact with each other, sharing videos. Vine was the golden age of the internet. And, we're just being funny and we're sharing cats and food. And it was very exciting and happy go lucky. But then after some time, we start to get to the point where we are getting into the projection land. And so now we're really dealing with the deep internal stuff where it's psychological. It's not just the happy go lucky dancing in the woods and separated from society and not relating with people we don't want to relate to. Now we're relating with people we don't want to relate to and dealing with the repercussions of that. Uh, dealing with the repercussions of not accepting them, right? So the challenge comes from not accepting people's worldviews, from not accepting their beliefs, not accepting who they are and what they represent. And so we're drawing all these boundaries between ourselves and others, but still feeling this sense of that there's an enemy in my pocket, and we're not working on that. I think a big blind spot that's starting to show up is gender. And I'm not talking about trans people versus non binary versus binary. I'm talking in the binary bias that is probably a holdover from, nuclear family and before, but this belief that spouses can be victims of each other. Often there's this situation where if a spouse feels like a victim of their spouse, that they'll take it out on the kids, and then the kids become bullies to other kids, and that sort of powerlessness is spread. And that's what we pervasively feel, is this powerlessness that gets spread amongst everyone, right? And favorable and unfavorable sort of aspects of society. And we are starting to deal with some of the most unfavorable aspects of our culture that we are attempting to deconstruct, but they don't want to be deconstructed. People are clinging to their beliefs very hard uh, because it makes them feel safe. And so we're coming to the edges of fear, of people's fear of that deconstructing. So if they don't have this, then who are they? And that's what we do on an individual level. That's some of the challenges that we face on an individual level, is like, if we can deconstruct who we are and our relationship to society, then who am I? If I don't look at myself as a goth kid or a Puerto Rican, or some aspect of my family, or if I don't look at myself as an American, or from Philly, or or my history of work, or entrepreneurial prowess, like, who am I, right? And that gets into some really sticky, tricky territory, especially when we get to something like religion. Right now, there's a lot of attempt to deconstruct American Christianity, and they're holding on real tight. And it's the same thing on the other side with this tightness to a liberal identity. Even that is gonna be deconstructed as something that is, comedians do this really well. We look at culture and deconstruct what's happening and pick it apart so that we can rebuild it and see if it's still viable and intact. So as we enter this election, this US presidential election, we enter this kind of inflection point right now where either side is going to feel super safe with whoever gets elected, and they're going to attempt to try to deconstruct the other. It's almost like this feeling of last man standing, right? Which I don't think is actually going to be the case. I think that's just like the feeling that people have, that whoever wins is going to deconstruct the other, right? And so I think that's the pervasive kind of feeling, because that's been the tone of the last saculum, is deconstructing culture. So there's almost this feeling of like, if my person gets elected, then there's no way that we will get deconstructed. So I think it's going to happen either way. Like I think we're going to keep looking at our shadows and work through it until we get to the point of some sort of inflection point where a technology comes online that allows us to start moving forward, and whatever's left is going to have to be dealt with later, right? We're going to have to deal with an existential threat. There are continuing worldwide issues forming right now. um, and it's not just American issues. These are worldwide challenges of of which beliefs are going to really fight for their place in the world, and how does that lead into the next age? And that's a lot of stuff that I'm writing about, with what the catalyst is that brings in the new age, and what that new age looks like. What are we going to learn for ourselves in terms of well, I suspect, to give you a little preview, the next level moves from being the need to be accepted to the desire to be needed. And being needed is very different than being just accepted. It's that feeling again that I need to constantly be thinking about the world's issues. Being needed is not that at all. Being needed is, where am I needed? Where is my sense of passion and purpose? And it may not necessarily be a job. It may just be like, my job right now, or my passion, or my where I'm needed the most, is to serve my kids, or to serve the random person in the park that is sobbing. And it may not necessarily be a savior either. It's just, it could be me working on myself so that I don't disturb everyone I walk into a room with, working on my nervous system. And in a lot of ways, that may be where I'm most needed. A lot of people may be needed for external world stuff. They may have great capability for leading a nation or a city or a group of people or a revolution or a company, whatever. There are people who have that big picture ability, and that's almost like their dharma, their purpose, their what they're put on this earth to do based on their entire history of their own life. And if they tap into the essence of who they are, outside of just their culture and outside of just their story, what feels the most true to them, this combination of, could be personality stuff, could be Enneagram stuff, it could be what is happening when your nervous system is most relaxed, and what do you desire to do when you're fully centered and fully yourself. you know could be providing entertainment, it could be providing growth, it could be providing healing. Whatever the case may be, whatever the attunement is, there's this certain faith and trust that life will guide you towards it. It's not about choosing, it's not about deciding who you become. It's about tuning and then following your passion and following your most excited, uh, following your excitement. Once we get rid of the unnecessarily excessive fears, or the need to save the world, or this grandiosity, this specialness, because ultimately, with the gender thing, the victim and narcissism dichotomy is a massive projection. There's a lot of men on the conservative side that are projecting victimhood onto liberals. There's a lot of liberals, primarily women, who are projecting narcissism onto men. And it's all the same feeling that I'm special and you're not. And so it's not just an us versus them in a national sense, it's a much more subtle us versus them in a specialness and really like raw cultural identity sense. And I say these things because I don't know that I don't know when or how this may be deconstructed in the future. you know, right now people are seeing the patterns. They're seeing that there is a gender gap with voting, and that only highlights to me this bias that's coming forward. I forgot why I brought that up. I lost my place. Uh, but effectively, as we're moving to this place of being needed and trying to understand I mean, even following our essence beyond gender, once we move past this era of seeing men and women as opposites or villains, then we can start to really see how there's a greater sense of ability and purpose. A lot of men are limiting women to certain types of roles or prowess or anything like that. And a lot of women are limiting men to being aggressive and brute and harsh. And, we're sort of reinforcing these roles without realizing it, and once we can let a lot of that stuff go, we can really start to take off and do amazing new things together. Uh, but that's really what we're just going to be facing right now. And that's some of the toughest work in someone's personal postmodern life. When you're doing work, this animus work of getting to know a completely different experience than yours that exists within you, meaning that we're all human. And at some point, like, I don't have the experience of a woman. And so to get to know that part of myself that needed to be turned off at a young age because it's just not my experience, it's something that's missing. I can only collect that or get that by relating effectively with someone of the opposite gender. And I can't speak to the nuances of the transgender experience. Like, I don't know if you're born male, you need to still relate with women to collect that other side, or if you have an advantage because you're trans, and getting to know that side, or if that's a psychological takeover, um, and you're repressing the male traits and you need to get to know men. Like, I don't know what the case may be there. So I can't begin to. I have speculations, but I don't know that experience either. So as we also collectively get to know that experience, that is, I think it's both a phenomenon of trying to release this idea of gender, uh, and not be so attached to it. I don't mean necessarily that everyone needs to become trans or um, androgynous or anything like that, but I think it's needing to matter less. You know, for some reason, it just feels like it's needing to matter less. And so I don't know if this movement is a response to this bias that we're not attacking or attaching to or dealing with, or if it's an avoidance. And it could be both. It probably depends on the individual. I have no idea. Um, and by all means, this is not an attack on anyone or assumption of anyone's character. I'm just looking at it from an anthropological lens. But as I try to find a place to wrap up here, I think as we go forward, you know, what I was talking about in the beginning around the seasons turning and the earth going around the sun and the solar system going around the galaxy, it's like these are just perpetual movements and motions. And there is direction. We are going forward somewhere. Things are getting reconciled. And the challenge we have today is that it's becoming more difficult to find the positives and gratitudes of our history up to this point because we are so fixated on trying to work on our issues. And that can be the challenge when we're doing personal work too. We can have so much focus on what has gone wrong or what I've done wrong or what I need to do to repent that we can forget all of the amazing things that have led up to our existence. In an anthropological sense, yes, like all of the people that have had to survive to make sure that you exist. But then from a micro perspective, like you going through your life and surviving so many things. And at this point, realizing that there's really no external judgment on you as to like what you've done or who you've become. This has just been all a part of your karma and your story. You know, karma is a much more neutral word than it's projected to be. It's not about some sort of external punishment or reward for a behavior. It's really just starting to awaken the idea that, like, oh, I've created the reality that I live in, that everything I focus on comes to fruition. If I have a goal or a desire or something I want to see, it will eventually manifest in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not literally, but in some sort of way, because it's what I focus on. If I focus on fear, if I focus on not hitting something, I'm going to hit it because my brain doesn't hear the not. It just sees the target and it's going to focus on the target. It's going to focus on not focusing it. And those are the paradoxes I think that we're needing to reconcile as individuals and reconcile as a collective, that this thing we keep focusing on keeps happening. So maybe we should not focus on that. Maybe we should focus on a better way, a new path, a new direction, a new age, new inventions. Some of the things that I hope come to fruition, I suspect a new quantum age is upon us. I think that there is the discovery of getting quantum stability to happen will start to permeate very quickly around society, some at the biggest levels, maybe military wise, you know, looking at uh, a war theater, and the quantum computer looks at every possibility and basically creates a stranglehold on an enemy and is not surmountable by anybody, and basically creates this one-sided power in the way that the atomic bomb did back in the day. Uh, and I suspect that that age, even though it may come as a shock and awe moment for the collective, it will basically, like, awe and fear are sort of this like two sides of the same coin. Great fear can be often subsided by great awe, because awe is a sense of humility. Awe is a sense that I am small in this grand universe. So I remember what I was saying before. When it comes to specialness, the male and female aspect of specialness, this victim narcissism identity aspect, this sense of specialness is this feeling that I'm better or worse than anybody. And the antidote to that is learning that you're unique, but you're not special. You have a unique life story. You have a unique look, a unique circumstance, unique genetics, but you're not special. You don't have better or worse than anybody else. Maybe in a temporary sense, you know, we have competitions, we have economics, we have things like that, but these are all constructions. In its true totality of wholeness and essence, you're not better or worse than anybody else. And in that sense, when we reach a sense of awe and wonder, most recently having seen the Northern Lights here at Lake Ontario, that creates a sense of smallness and humility and awe that, like, wow, this is a massive place that we are a part of and we are tiny. And much of the time, we are still putting ourselves at the center of the universe without realizing it, either collectively or individually, that every problem I have is me, or I caused it, or it's someone's trying to hurt me, or I need to save people. That's the drama triangle, right? It's like, I have these villains, I am the villain. I have these heroes, I am the hero. I have these victims, I'm powerless. I'm me. Right. The shift from being accepted to being needed is about giving the ego a very specific job, right? It's not about killing the ego. That's all nonsense. The ego is like this abstract, almost non-dual word. It's this filtering system that allows for us to sort what's good and what's bad. And at some point, it's also about possessions. And so with the ego, it's very practical. I need to know that this is my laptop. And if someone comes in here and tries to take my laptop, I'm going to defend it. Unless it's, unless I'm going to get my ass kicked, then maybe I'll just let them have it. But the idea is like, I go into the parking lot and I need to know which car is mine. I'm not going to just grab any random car. Uh, that's an ego relationship. This is mine, you know? And in a way, those boundaries are important. And I think what gets lost in the shuffle around this postmodernism era is this challenge with boundaries, too, that we are feeling like in order to be a good person, to try to dissolve my ego or, to not overly assert myself, I need to let myself go and to, almost essentially merge with everybody. Like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be able to just walk outside and pick any car? It's like, yeah, but then you wouldn't be able to customize it to you. And you would have to adapt to an egalitarian way of living, and truth is you have your preferences. You have things that are potent to you, that are a part of your life trajectory and your life story, that mean something to you as a person, right? So the ego is not something to just poo poo and let go. It actually is what allows you to set boundaries between you and your children. So I believe in some aspects of the gentle parenting movement. I don't think I should be cruel to my kids, but I also don't think that they need to feel like we are on the same plane. We are. They need to see me as an authority in their lives, not to be a dictator, but to know that they are protected and that they are loved because I am going to ultimately take care of them. They're not. I'm not another sibling to fight with or compete with. They need to know that I have my stuff, they have their stuff. I have my emotions, they have their emotions. I have my beliefs, they have their beliefs, right? And I have my friends and they have their friends, right? And the challenge is we get a lot of this enmeshment that starts to happen. My kids need to believe the same things that I do. My kids need to feel the same types of feelings that I do. They need to not feel these feelings, but are allowed to feel these feelings, right? They need to not have these kinds of friends and they can have these kinds of friends, or they should just hang out with me and my friends. That's the kids that hang out with adults all the time. They don't have their own friends, right? uh, and you can see a pattern here. It's social, intellectual, emotional, and physical, right? So they also need physical boundaries. I have my room, you have your room. This is the public living space. You don't just get to leave all of your toys everywhere. You get to play in here and we're sharing the space, but you need to put your stuff away at the end of the day, that kind of thing. Those are boundaries, right? And so physical, emotional, social, intellectual boundaries are an important aspect of kids developing their own ego and developing their own sense of self. And we do that for ourselves as well. When we need to go back into our history and we need to understand how we developed and what may have been missing, we may go through and say, oh, I didn't have proper social boundaries. I didn't have proper emotional boundaries. I didn't have proper intellectual boundaries. I didn't have proper social boundaries or physical boundaries. So looking at those things and then saying like, okay, that's what I need to work on. And that's what I need to notice in my life when I hit a wall of annoyance, which is a projection. It's usually just some unconscious agency, something I do that I don't realize I do. Introjections, which are, basically these lack of boundaries that I'm taking on culture's problems, I'm taking on society's problems, I'm taking on other people's emotions. A lot of millennials have this problem because a lot of their parents, a lot of our boomer parents made their emotional problems our problems. Sometimes their social problems our problems, or some of their beliefs our beliefs. And individuation is this process of what is mine? What are my boundaries? Do I have too many boundaries? Do I have too little boundaries? And all of this stuff. I think this is like a whole different topic, really, but it is intertwined with some of what I think are leading to the big picture pathologies right now. There's millennials in particular are taking on a lot of beliefs that are inherited. We're taking on a lot of emotions that are inherited. We're taking on a lot of social ideas that are, we put a lot of social engineering into our life, and we may need to question what is ours versus what is society's messaging. And then physical boundaries are important too, that I think some are reconciling with with their relationship to their kids and stuff like that. So it's all relevant, and I think it's all important to think about. And it kind of leads into stuff that I personally am wanting to just shed and share with you, to for me to personally move on from, so that I can live my life, because I want to finish this book, and I'm starting a new full-time job soon, in a couple days actually. So the next podcast episode might be a little while, but this gives you a lot, I think, to think about for what's coming. You know, I was starting to project what I could see in the quantum age. I think the quantum age allows for incredible nuance. It might allow for incredibly nuanced brain imaging, so people can do psychedelic work, or they could do meditation work, scans of the brain or of the body that show really not just the brain. I think we put so much emphasis on the brain, but if we show more of the body, and it's the mind body connection, and we can physically see that, I think more people get the opportunity to tune that instrument, and can lead to all sorts of amazing releases for people at scale. I need another drink of water. When you do this much talking, it's a whole process. Um, and so yeah, I'm wrapping up here. Um, and I'll admit this is all personal indulgence. So hopefully you enjoy this. Um, I've gotten feedback that it's a lot of stuff. It's too much, but this is more art project than it is a business project. So I'm letting it roll. Um, so yes, imaging I think is going to be the big thing. I think if we can take the quantum age of computing and nuance tied with maybe AI and automation systems and stuff, we could probably do some greater anthropological scans of like the ocean, and which is vastly unknown, uh, deeper layers of the earth, maybe uncovering previous civilizations or more nuance to the history of human beings and their intelligence. Because we often assume because we're at the latest era of history that we're supposed to be the smartest, and that might not be the case. We may have done this before, or some version of this before, and we may uncover some aspects of that. We may put out energy and signals that actually allow for us to make first contact with an alien civilization. And that could usher in a new era of awakening for people to try to tune themselves to be ready for the arrival of a new alien species. Or we could image Europa or some other moon or planet and get all of this amazing insight, or discover life on another planet within the next 30-35 years. And that could change our entire perception of ourselves as human beings. We could totally create new forms of energy. We could create climate control ecosystems. We could, I mean, there's already inventions coming out that are helping with carbon capture, and just need to be scaled up. And this could be the mechanism for scaling that up. And so, or ion drives, some way to, propel us more further through the universe. Or Elon Musk gets his wish and people land on Mars. He's holding a vision and he's doing it. So good for him. That could very well be a possibility, and that could be our moon landing moment, right? So, there's a lot of possibilities, and I see it. There's going to be more ebbs and flows. There's going to be more challenges, more shadows, and whatnot. And really, like, it's It's going to get worse before it gets better, I suspect. But that's internal healing sort of represents external healing. And that's going to be the next theme, I think. It's the internal and the external. It's not just going to be about projections and deconstructing culture, but now it's going to be okay, what can we do about this? How can we build upon our past? How can we build a new legacy? How can we build the type of world we want to see? And start to move in that direction. This is not necessarily utopian pie in the sky. I think it's just being able to say that as a collective, we can start to build humility. And we've seen it in other countries. We've seen that it's possible. Um, and we are reaching the leading edges right now, as far as we know, of what's capable of happening at scale. So when it comes to the election, just make the best choice you can. Whatever is going to unfold needs to unfold. And I think if there's any piece that I could provide, it's that whatever needs to happen is going to happen. Like, it's not up to you. It's not up to me. We can have a say in it. We can try to focus on the lane of existence that we want to come to fruition. What are our preferences of what we want life to look like, and keep focused on that and keep trying to build towards that on a micro level or a macro level, and just let go of everything else, really. So I'm grateful to you for listening. I know some of you like these longer episodes, so let me know in the comments. I would really appreciate some feedback to know that this is not just me being too self-indulgent, um, and that there's some smart things here. Other things to consider is that if you made it this far, then you probably do like the work and should consider becoming a premium subscriber. What's going to be changing in the future is that the price will go up. So right now, dopamine.substack.com, go there, become a premium subscriber, and you'll effectively get grandfathered in to the next iteration of this, which is probably going to be closer to the $49 a month range. And it will be something where I am teaching. The welcome email will include basically a mini course showing you how to start using ChatGPT and AI for self coaching, for breaking down more complex concepts, ways to understand yourself, and it can help you track things about yourself that maybe you forget. Remind me of this. How does this relate to this idea? Um, you know, or talk to me like you're a therapist. Like, what I'm having some emotions in this area, or I need validation in this area. There's all sorts of stuff that you can use it for that can help you put less strain on your personal relationships ultimately, um, and allow you to get through some heavy material, whether it's something like the Gene Keys or development or uh, personality stuff or whatever. Um, I'll show ways to make sure that that information is accurate, and then also to um, support your ability to interpret things as well. Something like astrology is about interpretation. It's about looking at the stars or looking at movements of planets and what different representations are, and then interpreting it for yourself, what that means in your life. It's not telling you what it is. It's saying, it's like looking at a tarot card or a Rorschach test and saying, what do you see? Right. And helping you with that process. So that's some of my goals. That's the plan. That's like what I would like to move towards. So if you want to become a premium subscriber now, you will be grandfathered into that, and you will not have to pay that higher price. So if you're a current subscriber, don't worry about the price change. That's not going to affect you in any way, shape, or form. So I think that's it for now. Yeah, that's all I got. I feel released. I feel like I got all the stuff out that I wanted to get out. So grateful for that. Grateful for you. Thank you for being here. Um, and I hope you get the chance to have some peace in your life, some tea, do whatever you want to do, and have a good time. All right. Much love. Talk to you next time. I'm C Note. Later.